Good morning, church family. I'm excited that you've tuned in to worship with us this morning. If you have your Bible with you, I invite you to open up to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 20. As always, we're engaged in a sermon series where we go verse by verse through books of the Bible, and today is no different. We're going to continue our study beginning in the 19th verse and going all the way through the 26th. So, if you haven't done so already, please pause the video and take a moment and read out loud Luke chapter 20, verses 19 through 26, and I'll be waiting for you on the other side. All right, welcome back. Having done that, I'm sure that you're remembering kind of where we left off last week, and that is that the scribes and the chief priests are furious with Jesus. So the religious leaders of Israel are also the political leaders of Israel, and they are seething on the inside. They're so piping hot mad because Jesus has evaded all of their intellectual traps. They keep asking him questions, and he keep thinking that they've cornered him, and he's not cornered at all. And he turns the tables on them. They're trying to make him look bad, and they're the ones who end up looking bad. And then Jesus, if you remember last week, has just told a parable about how God is imminently going to take the vineyard, which is the representation of the authority that they have over Israel, away from them. And he's all but called them wicked tenants. And he has correctly prophesied his impending doom and death at their hands. And so, they're going to prove him right. In doing so, they prove themselves to be wicked. And so it's this incredibly tense fury that is growing in their hearts, right? We saw at the end of Luke 19 and verses 47 and 48. They've already determined that they're going to try and destroy Jesus. But he keeps destroying their arguments that would justify them being able to destroy him. And so the crowd, on the other hand, loves everything that they're hearing. They love him so much that they're singing ancient songs of praise to him. They're singing songs about the kingship of David being applied to him. They're in hog heaven as Jesus is here. Now remember, this is Passover week for them. And so I know that we're looking at all of these moments little by little and clip by clip and piece by piece, week after week after week. And the timeline can get really elongated for us. But it's important that we understand this is Passover week. And so it is a hustling, bustling, packed city. Jews from all over Israel, right? All the northern areas and all the southern Judean areas, and from out of country, people are traveling back. It's one of the three major holidays in the Jewish calendar. And it's a festival week. And so people are traveling back. They're staying in packed houses with relatives. And so there's an incredible amount of noise and commotion and excitement that's been taking place. So the enemies of God are powerless to kill Jesus yet. And yet their fury is growing and growing and growing. So there's this seething unrest that's taking place inside of them, and they're desperately looking for an opportunity to get rid of Jesus by any means necessary. They want to destroy him. And so as we begin today, we've got to remember that tension between the leaders who despise him and the crowds that adore him. And so we begin. Verse 19 of chapter 20. The scribes and the chief priests sought to lay hands on Jesus. It's another way of saying they want to grab him and get rid of him by any means necessary. In fact, they wanted to do so that very hour, meaning on the heels of him teaching the parable about the murdered son, which would come true at the end of this week. they realized that he told this parable about them in one of the ultimate moments in the whole Bible, right? That they perceived that Jesus had told this parable against them. Wow, how perceptive. He's looking right at them, talking about them in language that they understood. They don't understand a lot of what Jesus said, but they understood this parable and they didn't like it. They're furious. They're furious at the attack. They're furious at the idea that they won't reign forever over Israel. They're furious at the idea that outsiders are going to come lead the people of God. They have to get rid of Jesus, and they've never been more committed to that reality. But then you're going to see a slight change. See, they keep trying to trick Jesus in the area of religion, right? He's a rabbi, so they keep trying to ask him tricky rabbi questions. Well, as we see today, they're going to switch gears a little bit. And instead of going after him as rabbi and religious leader, which hasn't worked out so well, they're going to go after him on political grounds. See, if you can't win through religion, you're going to try and win through politics. Politics and religion are very potent tools in the hands of evil men. History has shown us that, lamentably. So here we see verse 20. So they watched Jesus, and here's the new plan. They send in spies who, we're told, pretended to be sincere. In other words, they're infiltrating Jesus's private ranks with false disciples. This is an old playbook in the schemes of hell, and they've just caught on to it and are enacting it. So they've sent in spies who will testify to what Jesus says in private. So they come in buttery sweet, but they have venom in their fangs. So they're going to come in, they're going to look like they're on his team, but really they're hoping to betray him, which we're not going to continue to talk about too much. But here's the idea. So they're going to pretend to be sincere in order that they might catch Jesus in something that he would say, in order to deliver him up to the authority and jurisdiction of the governor. And again, they have realized that they can't win on the Sanhedrin level. Jesus keeps outsmarting them in the religious realm. So now they have to go to the political arena. And of course, Pontius Pilate is governor in the Roman province that they are living in. So they're occupied by the Roman Empire, and that's going to play a vital role in today's text. So the plan is, let's hear him say something different in private than what he says in public. And so there's an honest assessment and craftiness to what they're doing. See, they know that most men, most leaders, almost all leaders, are slightly different, if not dramatically different in private than they are in their public life. Their private life and their public life don't usually agree, or at least not fully. And so even if we can't trap him in public, maybe we can trap him in private. So instead of needing the crowds on our side, we only need a couple of witnesses, 2 or 3 witnesses that we can put in front of the governor, and then the governor can take swift action for us. And then it's not our fault that Jesus gets in trouble, imprisoned, or killed. We didn't do anything. We just told the truth about what he said, and what he said got him in trouble with Rome, who, let's be honest, is a great government. No, they would never say that Rome is great governance. But they're going to use whatever they have available to them to accomplish their evil ends, thinking that they're noble, but they're not noble. They're vile. So that's the plan. The plan is send in the spies, make them play nice, wait till he says something in private that's not true in public, or does something in private that he would never do in public, and then we take that testimony to Pilate, and he's out of our hands forever. proverbially out of our hair, though the only hair I really have is kind of down here and not so much up here, as you can plainly see. Quarantine beards are fun. All right, so that's the plan that they've hatched. Verse 21, we pick up the plot. So they ask Jesus, but before they come up with a question, you got to understand how sugary sweet what they're about to say is first. They're totally going to butter him up before they ask their question in order to kind of put his guard down and let him think that they're already convinced followers. Rabbi, right? Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly, that you show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God. There is no flattery like flattering a preacher about his preaching. Believe me when I say, in earnest, not in jest, that there are times where your pastor needs to hear that you appreciate an area of ministry that he pours himself into. And that's true of me in some seasons. But it's also true that I like the praise of man and that I want to be flattered in the area that I care about, which obviously you guys know me enough to know that I love preaching. I love being a good preacher. I aspire to get better and better and better at it. I want to be used by God to communicate God's truth and share the good news of the gospel with everybody who will listen to me. And that's an earnest desire. But the doubts and the fears and the what ifs can also overtake even somebody like me who's been doing this for long enough. He should have a defense against that stuff. But every preacher wants to know that their preaching matters. And so here they are kind of buttering Jesus up in an area that obviously he cares about. He's been in the temple all week, teaching all day. Like, teaching is a huge part of what Jesus has done in his public ministry life. It's a huge part of what pastors and Bible teachers, Sunday school teachers like Greg or others who think about and prepare, your kingdom group leaders. They want to know that their leading matters, just as servants want to know that their service matters. So let me tell you very clearly that all you do in service to God by grace is well received. We are very grateful for all of your sacrifices, for all of your service. And the Lord is very pleased in this time by what we are offering and what we are doing. And so I want you to be encouraged that what you are doing, how you are praying, the things that you are sacrificing, they matter. They matter to me. They matter to our elders and our deacons, our church leadership. They matter to our kids. They matter to all of us. And so as you are led and able, make sure you give thanks to one another. I'm not the only one who's working in this COVID season. I've never been more proud of our elders. I've never been more excited to see the members of our community serving one another and loving one another and calling one another and caring for one another. And so I know it's an aside, but it's an important aside. It's also important to see, as we return to verse 21, that they're totally flattering Jesus in a way that they expect him to appreciate. And their goal here is to disarm him to the hostility of their question in hopes that he might misspeak and then they can get him, because that's what they really want. So they've buttered him up in verse 21, and now, verse 22, they're going to unleash the question. Here's the question. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? Let me give you a little bit of background so that you can understand why they think this is an awesome trick question. Israelites were paying a tax to Rome, the Roman government, the Roman Empire, to live on their own land. So Israel rightly believes that God has promised this land to them. And while Rome occupies this land, they have essentially a property tax that they are required to pay to be able to live and operate as a citizen within that empire. And so this is an incredibly unpopular tax. Now, let's be real. Are there such things as popular taxes? Do you guys get your paycheck at the end of the week or the end of the month and think to yourselves, oh, I'm so glad there's money missing here. I know that goes to pay for very necessary infrastructure and programs and all that kind of stuff. Or would you much rather say, as a matter of fact, I hate that program and I wish my money didn't go to that program. As a matter of fact, the government shouldn't take my money anyway, right? Like, we can rant about this because people always rant about their money and they always feel it in their checkbooks when they feel like the government is, unjustly reaching into their pockets and taking what they're not even going to use well. So not all of us feel that all the time, I know, but this is a sentiment that is very easy to make popular and was incredibly popular in their day. They hate this tax even more than most taxes because there's no justifying it. And so it's a third rail of their cultural. So they totally think that they have Jesus cornered. Why do they think he's cornered? Well, because the tax is so unpopular, they think that if Jesus endorses the tax and says they should pay it, he will lose incredible popularity. He will no longer be a hero of the people. He'll be yet another traitor to Rome. He'll be, in league with their oppressors. And so, if he becomes unpopular and everybody's not hanging on his words, they can kind of do whatever they want with him. Whether that's get rid of him and kill him, or whether it's, remove him because he's so unpopular, he'll never be able to make a comeback because they'll just say, oh, you don't want to listen to that rabbi. He's the guy who said we should be paying this tax. What's on the other side? So if Jesus can't say, yes, pay the tax without losing popularity, what's he risking on the other? See, this is why they think it's a trick question. They think they've got him trapped. They never do, but they think they do. Here's why. Because if he says, don't pay the tax, it's an unjust tax and you shouldn't have to pay it, then all they have to do is get 2 or 3 people to say that to Pilate about Jesus, and he'll be charged with insurrection, which is a form of sort of militant rebellion, and they'll kill him. So if he says pay the tax, it'll be unpopular, he'll lose influence, and then, they'll get him out of the scene and never to return. Or if he says don't pay the tax, they've got these inside spies. And so this is an incredibly well-crafted moment, an incredibly well-crafted situation, an incredibly well-crafted question, targeting a very hot-button issue at the height, in some sense, of its issue, right? Everybody's in there. All the Jews are gathered and they're all sick and tired of paying to live where God said is theirs. And everywhere they turn, Rome's occupying them. But if Jesus says, nah, don't pay that tax, he's going to forfeit his life. So they think they've got him caught between forfeiting his reputation and popularity and forfeiting his life. Either way, he's out of the picture. And they keep their power. So it's fascinating that they've sort of taken this question out of the sphere of pure religion and put it in the hands of an overlap between religion and politics in hopes of exercising politically what they've failed to do religiously, and that is get Jesus removed from power. Protect their own authority protect their own position of power. And so they think they have him cornered. Now, kids, is Jesus ever cornered? Mm-mm. Does anybody ever trick Jesus? Mm-mm. So, how does he get out of this one? I feel like we should cut to a commercial, right? The plot has just twisted. The conflict is in full view. Let's take a commercial break and then we'll come back after. No, let's keep going. So here's what we're going to keep going. So Jesus, we're told in verse 23, and this is awesome. Luke is very, very helping us here. He's very generous to help us here. He tells us what's happening in the mind of Jesus. This is what he understands. So by the power of the Holy Spirit, giving Luke insight into what Jesus is thinking in the same way that Jesus, who's God, knows the thoughts of others, Luke is telling us what Jesus knew about the thoughts of these spies who have infiltrated him. He perceived their craftiness. And so that word craftiness is used in other places in the New Testament. And it's dealing with conniving, kind of seeking to trick. And so Jesus knows that they are, being crafty. And so he responds knowing that he's trying to be trapped. So they've flattered him. They've tried to disarm him. It's in private, not in public. And so they think they've got all of these things in store that he'll put his guard down and they'll be able to trick him. Well, his guard's up. He knows the hearts of men, and he knows these men's hearts, and that they are being crafty. Crafty like the serpent who sought to trick Eve in the garden, perhaps. Crafty. So he perceives rightly their craftiness. And so he gives them a command and then asks them a question. This is always dangerous when you're dialoguing with Jesus in the Gospels, right? Every time Jesus answers your question with a question, you're in huge trouble. Because he knows everything way better than you do. He knows your position better than you know. And he certainly knows his answer better than you know your question. So here's Jesus' statement and then question. So he gives a common command. Show me a denarius, which is a Roman coin. And it's a Roman coin that has the value of about a day's wage for a laborer. So next time you bump into Dale, hopefully soon, face to face, you can ask him, hey, Dale, what's a laborer in your company make in a day? That's roughly the value of what that denarius would be worth. And so presumably somebody has that Roman coin in their pockets or their wallet, their bag of coins. So they would pull it out and they would lift it up. So they've lifted up the coin. Here's the denarius. So they've obeyed the instruction. And then here's the question. Whose likeness, image, picture, and inscription does it have? Now, this is a very innocuous command and question, right? Hey, pull out a coin. All right, I've got a coin. Whose image is on it? Do you know what this is? That's right, kiddos. This is a nickel. Do you know who this is a likeness of or an image of? That's right, it's Thomas Jefferson. And in fact, on the back, you have an artist's imprint stamped on the back of the nickel. I'm trying to play with the lights here. Of Monticello, which is his house, his residence. And so, if I were to ask you whose image or likeness is on the U.S. nickel right now, you could say Thomas Jefferson. And so that's as innocuous, that's as harmless seeming as this question is. And so they pull out the coin. It's a denarius. It's got Caesar's face on it. It's got his name, kind of abbreviated form, stamped on it. And so the answer to the easy, harmless question, like they have no idea they're about to be trapped. The answer they give is Caesar's, right? Augustus Caesar's image and name would be on that coin. So they reply very simply. You're asking a simple question, we'll give you the simple answer. Caesar's. Okay? So then his follow-up question, and this is where he hits him hard. Ready? This is one of the most famous statements Jesus ever makes. It's one of the most talked about statements in all of human history since that Jesus has ever made. Okay? Philosophers, theologians have debated, discussed the implications of this, volumes and volumes, books among books. I mean, I've got a bunch of books behind me. If you've ever been in my study at church, you know that there's tons of books there, way more pages than would fit in that room, let alone along those bookshelves, have been written about what this statement means and what its implications are for government and for the church. And so I can't tell you the number of sermons that have been preached on this text. So I'm honored and a little nervous to be doing it before you today, but Jesus then speaks. He's made this simple command, asked an incredibly simple question, and then he gives this conclusion that responds both with his answer and a powerful answer, powerful response to their trick question. And he doesn't say yes and he doesn't say no, because they've given him what we call a false dichotomy or an illegitimate binary, which means they think that there's either a yes or a no. Pay the tax, don't pay the tax, and either one you choose, you're in trouble. And Jesus is going to say neither yes nor no in the way that they want. He's actually going to say both yes and no. And he's going to do so, as the Son of God is uniquely able to do, perfectly. Watch what he says. Then render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. In other words, if it has Caesar's picture on it, give it to Caesar. It's got his name. It's got his image, likeness. Give it to him. In other words, there is a legitimacy to civil government, right? Our governing authorities have a legitimate claim on our civil discourse, our civil responsibilities. We should pay all the taxes, not a penny more, but all the taxes that we're obligated to. We don't get to say, well, I like these taxes and I don't like these taxes, so I'm going to pay these but not those. And that's not how that whole citizenry thing works. And so Jesus is, in one sense, agreeing that Caesar has a legitimate governing role over the people of Israel. But it's limited. It's not an unlimited reign. It's a limited scope. The government has civil authority, but it doesn't have any other type of authority. And in fact, it only has that civil authority because God has chosen to give Caesar that authority. God has chosen to use Roman rule to accomplish his many varied purposes in history, in time, in that world. And so, yeah, citizens should pay taxes. We don't have to be excited about it all the time, but we should understand that when we pay taxes to the government, we are also, because the government is subordinate to God, we can pay those taxes unto the Lord. So we don't have to divorce the separation of church and state, in that the state works for God. Not in a sense of establishing like Christian rule over the world. I don't mean that. What I am focused on is this idea that giving to Caesar is a lesser thing than giving to God. So Jesus is going to make a lesser demand and then a greater demand. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's is, hey, give Caesar the money that has his picture on it. But give to God everything that belongs to God. So let me see if I can summarize it in these two small questions. What belongs to Caesar? The things with his image on it. Okay. What belongs to God? Everything. Right? What is it that could belong to Caesar that doesn't belong to God? Right? Like these Jewish leaders and these spies who infiltrated the disciples, they falsely believe that these two have nothing to do with each other. That God gets some things and Rome gets some things. But that's not how it works. Everything that Rome has, God has an even greater claim to. So they're subordinate to God. That's how this works. So we can pay our taxes to our civil authorities knowing that they don't have an absolute claim to us, and they don't have an unlimited claim to us. They have a very limited claim to us. Now, I don't have time today to go in what would justify a revolution, or what is the biblical basis for revolting against your government and replacing it, or taking down your leaders and putting new ones in and stuff. Like, that's a much bigger conversation we don't have time for today. But it's important that we understand that does exist. It's also important that we understand that when Paul writes Romans 13, he's very much speaking to a people who are governed by one of the most vile tyrants of all time, Nero. Nero, who burns down part of his own city so that he can make space for expansion and renewal. Like, evil. If you want to know how to describe Nero in one word, evil. Nero is evil. And Augustus Caesar, not that much better. The Roman rule over Israel was often brutal. But we rightly understand that God can use even brutal leaders to accomplish his purposes, and that he's to be trusted in that. It doesn't mean we can't ever cry out against injustice. We should. We should. We should. But it also means that we have to be very careful that we don't delegitimize the legitimacy of governance conceptually, which is part of what they were trying to do right here. And so, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. What belongs to Caesar? This pitiful little tax? Yeah, pay the tax. His image and likeness is on the coin. Give it to him. But what belongs to God again? Oh, that's right. Everything. See, God governs all spheres of human life. Governing authorities, the family, the church, and even others that we could name. Like, God governs all spheres. He governs over all created things. And that's good news for us. We need God to govern over all created things. And ultimately, all these little spheres are subordinate to the one macrosphere, which is God's rule and reign over all created things. So, Jesus is perceiving their craftiness. He knows that they think they've caught him, and he busts right out of their trap and finds the true understanding in this mix. So not only does God have everything, own everything, govern everything, there's something else that's being spoken here. And it's a little bit subtle, but you've probably caught on to it by now. And that is that nobody can hold up in their hand a single object that belongs to God, in the same way that they could hold up the coin and say this coin belongs to Caesar. Why? Because it's made in his likeness. It's got his image stamped on it. What in all of creation is made in God's image? What in all of creation is made in his likeness? What in all of creation uniquely bears his name? Yeah, people. They can't hold up an object in their hands because they themselves are the object. Give Caesar coins. Give God your whole self. The coin is made in Caesar's image. You are made in God's image. Go all the way back to Genesis 1. Listen, I'm going to read this to us. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Verse 28. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth." You get it? Here's God in Genesis 1 giving the super high above view of all of the creative process. And he's saying amongst himself, right? God 3 in 1. And you can see God speak of himself in plural terms, right? Us, our, in verse 26. And then you can see him speak of himself in singulars in verse 27. His, he. And then God said to them in verse 28. So here's God deliciously moving in and out of speaking of himself in both the plural and the singular, and then speaking about us first in the plural, right? Listen again in verse 26. God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them." See, as soon as God is speaking about man, he's not talking about men. He's talking about mankind, human beings, those who will be forged in his image, unique among all creation, because we alone are to have and exercise dominion over creation, dominion, rule over creation. And we do so as image bearers. And it's not just men who bear this responsibility. The language here is very clear. Verse 27, so God created mankind, humans, in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Okay, singular. But then he goes on to say, male and female, he created them. You get it? So women are part of man. Men are part of man. This is the language that we're given. And so humans, men and women, who produce men and women in the form of boys and girls, who grow up to be, you got it, men and women, are all uniquely made in the image of God. In fact, we learn in Genesis 2 that God had made all the other created beings, and it was good. And then God made man, and it was very good. Well, it's important that we remember Dr. Gaffin's qualification that it was very good, but not very best. And of course, Jesus brings us at the close of all of human time to very best. Because of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, all of God's people will be receiving very best. The reward as if we had done very best. But that's a point to be developed further at another time. Here's the key though. Everything belongs to God. And in addition to that, you and I, as unique image bearers, men and women, children who bear his likeness in who we are, in what we have, and what we're called to do, which is rule and reign as subordinates to his ruling and reigning in his likeness, in his name. Adam and Eve were supposed to take God's image, them, and bring it as ambassadors all the way around the globe. So when Jesus says, give to Caesar that which has his likeness, and then give God that which has God's likeness, he's talking about you and me. He's talking about our everything. Every sphere of our lives should be offered to him. Let me see if I can say this a way that you might remember. My body belongs to him. My home belongs to him. My work belongs to him. My time belongs to him. My talents, they belong to him. My money, that belongs to him. My everything belongs to him. And so when I render unto Caesar a portion of my money, in doing so, I can be joyful in that I'm doing my duty to my country. And I'm recognizing God's sovereign placement of me in time and space, in the place that I am, with the authorities over me that I have. And so I can joyfully serve God as I participate as an active player in public life. That's in fact part of what Dr. Riken says we owe to Caesar, right? We owe Caesar our money proportional to our responsibility as taxes. We owe him our prayers, right? The New Testament is filled with the command that we are to pray for our leaders and our governing officials. In fact, you regularly hear, not incessantly, but regularly hear an elder prayer spoken about our desire to pray for our civil leaders and authorities over us that God has sovereignly placed. And so it doesn't mean we can't question them. It doesn't mean that we give them perfect and total service when they're unworthy of it. But it does mean that part of what we render unto Caesar is the taxes that we pay, the prayers that we offer, and our engagement in the public affairs of our communities. We should live in the public sphere. So here's the deal. What is Jesus saying here? He's saying, God made me. God saved me. Everything I am and everything I have, I offer in service to God. And let's remember, if the life and death and resurrection of Jesus teaches us anything, is that he has freely given his body. He left his home. He's worked his work. He gave of his time. He unleashed all of his talents and healing abilities. He gave up even the use and ownership of money as a whole. His whole public life was contingent upon the money that other people sacrificed and donated and gave to support him in his ministry. When we are invited by God to yield ourselves to him as his subordinates, not only are we imaging what's true, we're imaging what he himself has done. In other words, he's redeemed us, which means he has purchased us for a price. And that price was his own blood. Dear brothers and sisters, The response that we should have is the response that even his enemies had. Verse 26 as we close, and they were not able in the presence of the people to catch Jesus in what he said, but marveling at his answer, they became silent. Well, may have become silent as they marveled at Jesus' words. But you and I, we're going to sing praises to him. We're going to marvel at Jesus in song. Are you ready? Let's do it.